attention is shifting global dynamics. Garcia 17 of the Bruegel Institute writes that as a whole, China's economy is slowing and its banks are encumbered with doubtful loans, leaving no room for the massive lending needed to finance the BRI. Curtin 17 of the European Institute of Romania explains that without European cash, the BRI won't survive. Casarini writes that the EU and China have already talked about co-financing, but moreover, Balding 18 writes that the BRI is undergoing a legitimacy crisis, and unfortunately, Smith 19 writes that the EU would restore the Belt and Road's legitimacy. Saving the BRI leads to war in two ways. First is the South China Sea. Kaplan 19 of Foreign Policy writes that China's expansion in the South China Sea is driven by Xi's desire to challenge the history of Western domination in the region. Thus, Dutton 14 of the U.S. Naval War College explains that China's priority is to reduce the vulnerability by creating a maritime security periphery around the South China Sea. Bowman 19 of the National Interest explains that though China has plans in place to stage a military buildup and take islands in the East and South China Sea, that China refrains from acting aggressively now is its independence on maritime trade and the West for its economic well-being. Problematically, Bowman continues that China is using the BRI to divert trade away from the South China Sea, allowing China to take a decisive military action in its neighborhood. Indeed, Global Trends 19 writes that China believes now is the perfect time to expand their influence in the region before U.S. commitments strengthens. Unfortunately, French 19 of the Atlantic writes that once China takes over disputed islands with Vietnam, the domestic unrest in Vietnam would force the government to lash out because they're at risk of losing all state legitimacy if they don't, making military action by Vietnam inevitable. For example, Wu 11 of Business Insider warns that Vietnam's economy is reliant on regional oil, and allowing Chinese expansion would give control of that oil to China, forcing Vietnam to lash out to save its economy. Because they have doubled military spending since 2004, Mizukami 14 of the Medium writes that Vietnam is the most likely actor to spark a conflict in the South China Sea. Unfortunately, Gompert 14 of RAND writes that because China underestimates the U.S. security commitment in the region, China will engage with Vietnam in a conventional war. Despite China believing that the U.S. has no security commitment in the region, Gompert explains that because U.S. policymakers would believe that not responding would embolden China, the U.S. would respond, triggering an all-out war. Breaking Defense 13 explicates that because U.S. conventional power is so overwhelming, China will be forced to use its nuclear armament as the only method of reorienting the balance of war in its favor. Winter 11 of Columbia University laments that a U.S. Sino-nuclear war would immediately kill more than 10 million people and would bring upon a nuclear winter around the globe, destroying agriculture and creating a worldwide famine. The second is an Indo-Pak war. Barua 18 of Carnegie India explains that before Chinese investments into the Belt and Road Initiative, India had relatively stable bilateral relations with its regional neighbors. There are two scenarios where war begins because of CPEC. First is emboldening Pakistan. Markey 18 of War on the Rocks finds that Pakistan is a revisionist state, prioritizing changing the status quo which favors India rather than promoting stable growth and tensions. Markey continues that CPEC provides a unique opportunity for Pakistan to hide behind bolstered Chinese forces and poke India until engaging in an all-out war. Second is an Indian lashout. Barua 18 of Carnegie India explains that CPEC will shift the power balance in the region, leading India to cling to its relevance through aggressive action. Hendricks 16 of the PIAE explains that CPEC threatens Indian interests by granting Pakistan de facto control over disputed territory and making them more economically powerful, causing militant groups on both sides to engage in conflict that pulls national militaries in as tensions flare. Markey 18 of War on the Rocks finds that Modi's nationalism and overexcited risk analysis from Pakistan and Chinese encroachment means that any minimal perception of a threat from Pakistan means that Modi is likely to attack and inevitably start a war. For these two reasons, Hero 19 of the National Interest writes that an Indo-Pak war would kill millions, with potential to bring a global nuclear war because of the aggressive military doctrines of both nations and a lack of influenceable actors, creating a planetary nuclear winter. Thus we negate.